Ben has been asked by Carpen Parish Council in the absence of the Chair and the Vice Chair to give a presentation as part of the Transport Working Group. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Chair. Hello everybody, Ben Dancy. I live in the village and I also run a business at the end of Madingley Road, so I'm at both ends of it. I'm interested. So,
Ben, can you speak into the microphone, please? Thank you.
Apologies, is that better?
Thank you.
So, I want to give you a quick, better alternative. I've got 8 slides. I will try and go through them promptly so that it's clear for you to all see what I'm talking about. So, Carpen Parish Council rejects option 3A in its entirety because we feel it's not proven that a segregated busway cannot run alongside Madingley Hill, the existing infrastructure, and thus avoid the damage to the countryside that Mr. Pellew has already outlined, and the damage to our community as well, which we've already discussed a lot this evening. We feel in Carpen that residents of other South Cambridgeshire villages, especially those on the fringes of Cambridge, should be deeply concerned about the precedent of what is being proposed for a historic village like ours, potentially like yours. Not only are we faced with a busway cutting straight through the village, but now the park and ride at Cromley, as big as Trumpington, coming within 50 metres of the nearest housing estate here in the village, set on the hill that Mr. Pellew has described previously this evening, dominating the village day and night. And the fact that our representatives, are considering this, it's good to see so many people here tonight worried about that. We're familiar with the corridor, so I'm going to go on. So the better alternative that I would just like to cover briefly is really thinking about Madingley Hill and the opportunities that it presents already. We feel that there's clear evidence that the off-road option, and we've talked about it a lot this evening, so I won't dwell on it, was favoured from the outset. And indeed that they've ignored the views of thousands of local people. And we've all touched on the wider frustrations that there are so many intelligent people in the city thinking about things like, autonomous vehicles, things like the potential for tunnels. That the conversation that we're having now is just not connected into what other kind of decisions may be available to us. So we feel there's potentially a better alternative, which is up on the screen at the moment. We feel that a two-way busway alongside Madingley Hill is possible to achieve, and we feel the benefits are significant. And I'm just speaking as a member of the village. We feel it would add no more than 2 minutes, and we've heard members of the decision makers here this evening say they'd be prepared to give a few minutes in order to preserve things that have been there for decades and centuries. We feel it would be far less damaging to the environment than the preferred route, which slices through land with, we think, 6 National Trust covenants to the north of the village itself. That would need an Act of Parliament to achieve. Then through the century-old orchard that we've heard. Then through the reserve, before reaching Westfields that we've talked about already. And we feel it would be less ruinous to our historic village of Carpen. The preferred option potentially comes within 10 feet of the nearest houses in the village, incredibly close. And we've talked this evening already about the welfare of the community given so little weight. And this idea could save tens of millions, 50, 60 million pounds, this sort of thinking that you see on the screen in front of you. So in short, we don't really understand why thinking about Madingley Hill, the 81303, more imaginatively, hasn't been done, hasn't been given serious consideration. A very rudimentary survey of the footprint of Madingley Hill shows us that it's between 20 and 30 metres wide. So the next few slides is just explaining the width of what's available and what we think is possible to go down it. The Cambridge to St Ives guided bus scheme is 6 metres wide, consisting of two 2.6 metre wide tracks, separated by a central reservation of 80 centimetres. There's a 4 metre wide bridleway, which the people from the team have showed us photographs of earlier on. The total width of it is 10.7 metres. can see it here on the screen. So if we just go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, someone. Thank you. It's like it's happening by magic. Okay. So you can see within the available footprint of what's on Manningley Hill that actually we feel that you really could actually fit a 2-lane busway, the existing road that's already there, and the necessary cycle path. And we just feel this is something that should be considered. We don't know if there are technical issues to achieving this, but it's just something that we feel, you know, really should be given serious consideration given the social and economic impacts that we've heard about tonight. But what then happens when we reach the bridge at the bottom of the hill, which is only 16.8 metres wide? And Mr. Pellu's already mentioned about, you know, the potential for closing the right turn to go south and the benefits that that might bring us. So we would propose 5 lanes that go over the bridge, 3.3 metres wide each, 1 for each bus lane and car lane, plus 1 if it's really necessary for turning right onto the M11. And then shoulders, if we just go on to the next screen, and there are bridges over the river quite like this, you know, sort of flying shoulders, where pedestrians and cyclists could cross either side of it. So you can see this here. If the City Deal really want to spend 67 million of our money on a brand new bus-only and apparently sub-optimal bridge, the route could leave the carriageway just before the current M11 bridge. And I think we have another picture of that. That's the purple line on the screen there. So if they really want their bridge onto Charles Babbage Road, that we feel could still be achieved. So the resolution, this is my final slide. Next slide, please. So this is the resolution. The A428 LLF believes that there is sufficient width for a high-quality busway and cycle facility alongside existing Manningley Rise from the A428 A1303 junction to the M11 junction. And we ask that the Greater Cambridge City Deal Board explore this option in more detail. Thank you.
Could I ask the officers for a brief view on that?
Can you tell me where the park and ride
Site 2.
Can you tell me where the park and ride will be proposed, please?
Site 2.
Site 2.
Any members like to comment?
Can we just ask the officers why that was rejected in the first place? Because it's such an obvious thing.
One of the reasons is because of the width of the corridor. So the width of the corridor, we believe, wouldn't allow for what's been tabled there. One of the reasons is because of severance and the need to allow for accesses to existing properties, Crobley Business Park, Manley Cemetery, and residential properties along there. So we didn't envisage the prospect of being able to get that level of segregation down that section. In a similar way, we've pointed to that on the section that's to the east of the M11. So there again, it narrows down to a point where you could get 1 lane running, and it might be tidal, but it would be 1 lane, and you wouldn't be able to improve cycle provision. In fact, it might even be detrimental to cycle provision. So much of
nobody's talking about the road after the bridge. We're talking here purely about the road to the bridge and how to get over it and turn right.
I would say to you that, you know, with respect to your reader entry measurement, I think you will find that the impacts on the adjoining properties will be severe, and also the environmental impact of cutting that sway down there without mitigation of trees and hedgerows, etc., would be very difficult to provide in that corridor. You would have to provide them somewhere else. So I think in principle there's a lot of difficulties in, if not infeasible, in terms of particularly property impacts of that proposal.
I'd also add that that proposal kind of skips over the issue of Cambridge Road, Coton, and Cambridge Road, Manley, because in effect you would be creating a severance for vehicles trying to emerge, and in effect you'd basically be creating potentially a huge problem for Coton, because the traffic wouldn't be able to get out of Coton at peak times. You'd have to introduce a new signalised junction at least, and we already know that junction is already over capacity. That area is already over capacity. So I think it doesn't achieve, as Adrian said, it's going back to my earlier point about hybrids, it doesn't achieve these key benefits, and it also has environmental costs. It's not cost-free. And as Adrian, a very good point, as we see in all these other schemes where it's on-road highway, you're very constrained with the amount of mitigation that you can actually put in place. You know, there can't be an avenue of trees down there or anything like that, because in effect you're taking every spare inch of space that's public highway. So
so effectively, in terms of strategic fit, when we looked at option 1, these were the considerations that we made in determining that it didn't do the things that it needed to do, which is deliver segregation, because it wouldn't effectively be segregation because of all the severance issues.
But you could run it down the middle of the road and then turn left out of your property then, couldn't you? If that was the deal.
When we talk about the issue of these middle road bus lanes, they're simply going to be hugely environmentally costly, because in order for them to even work at a conceptual level, they would need to be accompanied by a significant amount of traffic management. So really, you know, you're talking about turning Madingley Road into an urban environment in terms of the amount of traffic management that needs to go through Madingley Hill, I should say, going through that in order to manage a middle of the road bus lane. You know, and we have looked, and there is a technical note which I would refer people to, a technical note which has been published on the web regarding our considerations of middle of the road bus lanes. And although that was a contraflow bus lane, the same principles around traffic management, signage, gantries, all of that stuff all applies to a two-way bus lane. In fact, probably even more so, because the risk factors are even greater, where you've got vehicles coming two ways down the middle of the road and other vehicles turning across it. So it's not. I don't think it's an idea that's going to work in this sense personally. But you know, that's my.
But there can't be more than half a dozen properties on Madingley Hill.
The disbenefit to those properties can be massive. You know.
One of our duties is to, as we do with mitigating everything else, is mitigate our impact on property. And if we were to take a property and sever its access to the highway or prevent it from getting to the highway without provision of an entrance somewhere else, means that that is a total loss of that property, a detrimental impact on that property. Therefore, the budget that you're talking about could quite rapidly rise. I'm also mindful of the Grade 1 listed building, which is Madingley Cemetery, and the impact amount of that. Also, the proposal that you've got for the park and ride being next to the SSI site, which is one of the big problems with Site 2. So I think there's a number of in-principle difficulties with the proposal, and again I would say that it is within the thinking of what we've done when we've looked at trying to put something down that route, that frankly wouldn't stack up to provide the strategic fit in terms of what the policy it demands and what the vision or the agreement that City Deal has in mind in terms of investing through transport for wider economic benefits.
But with the greatest respect, those are issues that are common to what's been outlined on 3A. I mean, you know, National Trust covenants, Acts of Parliament, environmental damage to, you know, pristine view.
Well,
you know, that these are the same issues.
All things need to be assessed, and you know, you might argue that one environmental impact outweighs another, but that's not how an environmental impact assessment has to be addressed. So they're quite serious impacts in terms of property. One of the things that we've done through the catchment routes that we've shown, and indeed one of the reasons we've shown them, is to make it clear to people that there aren't properties being demolished as part of the project, nor there seems to be any need, as far as we can see at this strategic stage, to take people's front gardens, which was certainly the case with the work that we did when we looked at going down the existing highway route.
Can I just ask you one question? I mean, you are, like always, you're completely inconsistent. So you talk about Madingley Cemetery as being this crucial grade listed asset, which of course it is. But Cambridge happens to have 1,500 listed assets and also is one of the world's greatest heritage cities. And in 2008, the High Court turned around, and this is fact, and said that the Coton Corridor was the most important location on the edge of Cambridge for preserving the historic city. So I think that, with respect, some of your plans are outrageous from a heritage point of view. And I think one of the concerns we have actually about the process, if I may, is that every time we ask about that, you always say, that's a political issue. We'll leave that to Francis Burker. We'll leave it to, you know, Lewis Herbert, etc. And the reality is that, sorry, the Coton, if you take the Coton, if you take, no, but hang on, if you take, for example, the Coton Orchard as an example, which is what I think Helen is trying to avoid, actually, you're desecrating, you're starting a process of desecrating Coton, which is actually a key part of the heritage city that Cambridge is. So you must think harder. I'm not saying that the solution I've come up with is the final solution, but you must think a lot harder about mitigation. And by mitigation, it's not planting a couple of Christmas trees and saying that that's it. It's actually trying to avoid harming Coton.
Yeah, the first important part about an environmental impact assessment is understanding the scope of the impacts you're likely to trigger. And once a strategic decision is made by the board as to which do they want to go south, down the central, to the north has been made, then that level of determination can begin. To do that on all of these would be an extremely onerous and costly and timely thing. The reason I cited the cemetery with its 8,000 war graves is because that's along the route that the gentleman to my left was pointing to. So it was a specific reference to that alignment is given.
So will people not be able to get there more easily if there's more buses there from the centre of Cambridge?
I think much of it is to do with how people who existed get access off that road to and from, and not including Cambridge Road itself, how that would be achieved without a loss of their property that would make it complete loss effectively.
Well, it would also have the advantage though, wouldn't it, that all buses could use this new busway, not just rapid transport buses. I mean, you have all the buses down Manningley Road would be able to jump on the new infrastructure. I mean, as in my Coton Parish Council hat on, I would like to talk in favour of this motion because, you know, if the main problems are with it that you can't turn right from the, you know, the half a dozen or so properties on the hill, and that we would need traffic lights at the Coton turn, and we'd be taking the road to the hedge, not, you know, as far as I could see, it wasn't anybody's gardens anyway. And then you'd either be going over a bridge with shoulders on it and save 50 to 60 million pounds on the scheme, or you would be able to turn off just before the bridge and then go over due west into, can I just finish, into Charles Babbage. And I would have thought most people living west of Cambridge would think that was a great deal, quite frankly.
Just on point of accuracy, sorry. The point about the bridge going over going to the existing bridge and saving £50 million is just, it is inaccurate. You know, the estimated cost for the bridge we're proposing is nowhere near 50 or 60 million pounds, and as we said in our presentation, the point here is that you've got a huge amount of congestion on Madingley Road as you come off the M11, vehicles turning right, going into the park and ride. So the point there is that, again, going back to my earlier point, that, you know, you're breaking eggs in order to basically put vehicles into a bottleneck, and that isn't going to achieve very much in the long term. So you know, at the very least, I think you have to recognise that if that proposal was going to be reasonable, it would still require a new bridge, and the kind of bridge that you're showing isn't going to be any cheaper than the bridge that we're proposing. Could even be more expensive because it's actually going to be a lot longer because it's a skewed bridge going like that, whereas ours is going straight across, and they're a lot more difficult to build. So just from the point of accuracy, I do think I wanted just to make that point.